On today's show, NBA power rankings continue the messy middle of the Western Conference. Are the Wolves legitimate contenders after back-to-back conference finals trips? Plus, can the Suns or Spurs make a jump into the top 10? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Joining me is my partner in crime, the host of Locked On Heat, David Ramil. David, when you look at the state of the Western Conference, how messy is the middle of the Western Conference to you?
Pretty complicated. A lot of teams that have made some moves, and I think they're much more evenly keeled than you might think. And there are teams that have different dynamics to them and how they're going to approach the regular season and might be gearing for a postseason run. But it's going to be just as difficult as we discussed in our previous episode when we looked at the top 5 teams. There are a lot of teams that I think kind of stand out there, but it's much more close in determining the last, I'd say, 3 through 9 in the Western Conference. They're a very, very evenly matched there. So it's a pretty interesting group.
We're going to get into all of that on today's show, kind of doing our power rankings 6 through 10 of the Western Conference. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On NBA your first listen each and every single day. Now, as a quick refresher here, we're running this power rankings series throughout the offseason here on our day of doing Locked On NBA. So our past Western Conference Power Rankings edition, just a quick run through that. My top 5 in order: I had the Thunder, then the Rockets, the Nuggets, the Clippers, and the Lakers at 5th. David had the Thunder at 1, then Clippers, Nuggets at 3, Rockets at 4, and the Warriors at 5. So that's kind of our starting spot here for teeing us off for who we think the 6th best team is in the Western Conference. So David, I'll let you have first crack at it. Who do you have at number 6 on your list?
Number 6 on my list is the Los Angeles Lakers. And I think, look, you had them in your top 5. I think it was a good choice to include them there. I think they've built a team that can compete this season. And I don't know why necessarily I'm bullish on them. I think obviously their record last year was a little bit more of I don't think it was as predictable as you might have thought. And yet the acquisition of Luka Doncic, the fact that he's in shape, the fact that he is looking to kind of establish himself as the linchpin of that organization, I think it bodes so well for where the Lakers are. And look, I do like the fact that they're kind of bolstering their depth a little bit. They did lose a key player in Dorian Finney-Smith. I understand that, and at the same time, I think they're still positioned to be one of the top teams in the West. And so look, you have Luka, top 5 player in the NBA. I think you have LeBron, top 10-ish, 10 to 15 maybe player in the NBA. That's still pretty good. That's a great core to have. And then you add a guy like DeAndre Ayton. You have all the other players that surround them. And I think it's a group that is focused and wants to capitalize on this season. I think their defense is still going to continue to be an issue, but I think given everything else that they've got on that roster, they're still going to be competitive. They're still going to win a lot of games, and I wouldn't be surprised for them if they somehow found a way to crack the top 5 in the Western Conference either.
You know, that's one where I go back on it. It's so hard to bet against Luka and LeBron as long as they're still on the same team together. And the fact that they had an off season to plug some of the holes on the roster, an off season of training, of slimming down for one Luka Doncic, on the cover of Men's Health magazine, all that good stuff, doing the full PR blitz to try and get back at Nico Harrison, all that good stuff. So I agree. It makes sense that Lakers are right there, kind of on the precipice, right, teetering between that top tier of the West and then the top spot of this next bracket here that we're doing, kind of the middle of the pack of the Western Conference. I'm going to go the inverse then, and this may lead for a little bit of a boring first segment, but I got to go with the Warriors here, and I will say that I was back and forth on this because my biggest question mark about this Warriors team, as good as they were post Jimmy Butler acquisition, right? They were the best defense in the NBA after acquiring Jimmy Butler this past offseason, losing Kevon Looney. That's, I think, a bit of an underrated loss for them. Looney has been such a linchpin for some of their, more successful seasons. He's been an important force in the middle for them for years now. So I think losing him certainly hurts a little bit. But to me, the big question for me about the Warriors, I think the talent is undeniable. It's just, do they have enough juice for another run? And that's the thing, right? You've got Jimmy Butler with a lot of miles on him. Steph Curry's not getting any younger. They're both still incredibly talented players, but do they have the depth and do they have the juice to put forth another strong run? Or will they be a team that, maybe prioritizes things like rest, right? And the health of their star players? Could you see them fall a little bit in the regular season because they're trying to preserve those guys for a potential postseason run? Are they a team that doesn't really worry about seeding ramifications, that kind of thing? From just a sheer talent perspective, though, I think it's undeniable the combination of Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond, plus their supporting cast. I think you still have to take the Warriors incredibly seriously. I couldn't quite put them ahead of the Lakers in my rankings, but I have them right there. And I think you and I are on the same page here. Lakers, Warriors, very interchangeable in that 5-6 spot for our power rankings.
Yeah, interesting and liking enough. A young blend of youngish players, and at the same time still relying on older veterans to help carry the load, especially during the regular season. I think that's going to be such a defining characteristic for both these groups because it's so, like, you saw this with the Warriors. They were, by their own admission, a middling team at the start of the season. And then as to the acquisition of Butler, it seemed like they were just much more engaged. They seemed like they have a clear purpose and identity. I think they bought into the idea that they were going to be competing for a title. And as such, you could see them playing with a renewed sense of purpose and energy. And you wonder whether or not they're going to be able to carry over through next season. I think this team is so self-aware just because of the veteran leadership on that group that they know that this might be their last chance. And that's for everybody across the board. As good as Steph is, as great as Jimmy and Draymond are, I don't know how much longer that they have an open championship window. And so this might be their last chance to really capitalize on what they were able to do last season. And
it certainly, it doesn't help matters that they've got this, like, the dark cloud of, like, the Jonathan Kuminga situation lingering overhead, and that's been, that saga has been dragging on all off season long. Hopefully, it comes to a resolution sooner rather than later, although this feels like it's a thing that's probably going to drag into the season. Maybe it's just, Jonathan Kuminga is, calling the Warriors bluff with the whole qualifying offer situation. And, that's been the holdup on them actually getting Al Horford. And there's all these moving parts here at play. But if the Warriors are able to resolve the Kuminga situation, hell, I mean, there was that offer out there reportedly, right, of the Kings potentially trying to get their hands on Kuminga for, Malik Monk. And that to me seems like a no-brainer if you're the Warriors. And, it turns out the holdup on that was like one of the first round picks that the Kings wanted back from the Warriors. And like, no, we're not going to do that. It's like, at this point, like, if you've still got a chance to win at the highest level with Steph, with Jimmy, with Draymond, adding a talent like Malik Monk to bolster that backcourt, and then subsequently being able to go out and get a guy like Al Horford to help your front court depth after losing Kevon Looney. If they could make those two moves, if they stop, digging their heels in on that first round pick being the holdup for dealing Kuminga to the Kings, I would firmly have the Warriors in the top 5 if they're able to make both of those acquisitions. That would make the Warriors a really, really scary team to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think you'd have to certainly make that case.
Coming up, we're going to talk about whether or not the Wolves should be viewed as legitimate contenders. They're coming off back-to-back conference finals appearances, but it maybe doesn't feel like they have quite the ceiling that some of these other teams do in the Western Conference. Plus, can the Suns or Spurs make a jump into the top 10? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by OpenPhone. Look, if you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a different service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait around? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a total game changer where your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And OpenPhone is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba, openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. And continuing on here at Locked On NBA, thanks so much for making us your first listen and being here with us every single day. For your next listen, go check out our sister program here, the daily Locked On NBA show with Doug, Matt, and Hayes on this exact same podcast feed or on YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, all that good stuff. Continuing our power rankings of the messy middle of the Western Conference. 7th on our board, David. We got the Lakers out of the way. We got the Warriors out of the way. Where are you going for 7? I feel like I can jump the gun assumption, but we're going with 7.
You hinted at it in the tease there, and I think you've got to look at the Minnesota Timberwolves as the 7th best team in the Western Conference. I think that might be underselling them a little bit. We certainly got some feedback in our first preview of the Western Conference that the Wolves belonged a little bit higher, perhaps, and yet it was tough to make an argument against the teams that we did include there. I mean, maybe they could have supplanted the Warriors for me or the Lakers for you in our list, but I think it's just really difficult. There's questions there, some aging players, clearly a superstar in Anthony Edwards. They didn't really lose much in the offseason. I know Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a name that a lot of people might not necessarily recognize as a strong role player, but I think he fit a great role for the Wolves last year, and he is going to be a loss for that roster. And yet, I think they'll still be able to weather that storm fairly well. I don't think it's going to be as significant as some people might project it to be. And that being the case, although they didn't make any significant upgrades or changes to their roster, I still believe in the core of that group. If you've got Rudy Gobert, he could still anchor a defense at an extremely high level. You still have Anthony Edwards. You've got Mike Conley. I think it's a solid group and great leadership, great coaching. I think Chris Finch is one of the underrated coaches of the NBA, and I don't think anybody really knows exactly how impactful he is on a game-to-game basis. And having said all that, they've achieved some incredible success. Like, he is proven that he can get the most out of his respective teams, and I think it's you certainly have to consider them one of the top teams in the West. It's just they're a really deep conference, and that's just ultimately what it comes down to. Would I be surprised if Minnesota winds up being a top 4 team in the West? Absolutely not. And yet somehow putting them at 7th still feels just as appropriate.
I'm so torn on this Wolves team, David, because I want to like them so badly. And look, we talked about this in our squad show at one point last week on this feed. The Nickeil Alexander-Walker loss is a big one for the Wolves, but at the same time, they have, big expectations for, roles moving forward for Terrence Shannon Jr., for who am I blanking, for Jalen Clark as well, bigger responsibility for Rob Dillingham moving forward, right, to hopefully give Mike Conley a little bit of a reprieve, as he's getting up there in age. It's a tough situation with the Wolves, though, because I feel like, and I'm going to get a lot of hate from Wolves fans for this, of their 2 Western Conference Finals runs, I'm only really impressed by one series win that they had. So going back 2 years ago, right? They beat up on a very flawed Phoenix Suns team, like a Suns team that was not as good as they were when they made it to the finals. They traded for KD. They lost all their depth. They had DeAndre Ayton playing unmotivated basketball. Like, that was a flawed Phoenix Suns team that they just demolished in the first round, swept them. Then they went toe-to-toe with the Nuggets, fresh off their title, and that Nuggets team was talented, strong, all that, took them to 7 games, they won, right? A lot of credit to them in that series. But then they got dusted by the Mavericks in 5 games. Rudy Gobert just completely picked on all series long by Luka Doncic. Then you come to this year, right? They get to face against, a broken kind of Lakers squad that didn't really have the right pieces around either of Luka or LeBron to really contend at the highest level. And that was kind of okay, well, whatever. Like, we're not really trying to compete this year. We got Luka Doncic. That's already our championship. We're fine. And then in the second round, they were on their way to, I don't know, healthy Steph Curry. Wolves don't make it out of that series against the Warriors. I truly believe that. And I kind of feel like, as good as this Wolves team has been, they have a really low ceiling compared to a lot of their counterparts in the Western Conference. That's where I struggle with this team. I don't know what the next step is for them other than Anthony Edwards needs to take another step forward in his superstar trajectory and become a star that really elevates those around him as opposed to just being a superstar in his own right.
That's a very good point. I've got another lingering question there too. Like Julius Randle, does he respond, with the contract settled now? Like what typically post-contract year Randle does not play at the same level as contract year Randle. And so you wonder whether or not he's going to continue to play at the high level that he has in the past. It seemed like he answered some of the questions regarding his postseason ability and whether or not he comes up for those games. Now what's the next step? Is he satisfied enough? He's got his contract. He's got his money. He's going to be able to play as consistently and as well as he has over the last couple of seasons. I think that's such a huge question. And I think it could really define the season. But I think you're absolutely right. It's Edwards because of his incredible stealing and what he's capable of. I think, of being a top 5 player in the league. And if he makes that sort of leap, then the Wolves will follow suit.
I'm so torn. It's like, I don't want to say I begrudgingly have them there at 7, but it's not like a confident 7, if only because like we saw how poorly they started out this past season. They struggled a lot in the regular season. And I think that there has been a decent amount of seedings luck that has played into their favor in both of these conference finals trips that they've achieved. There wasn't like a pathway for them where I was like, yeah, the Wolves dominated and they deserved that conference finals appearance. Like, that Nuggets series, I'll give them a ton of credit on that one. But the other 3 opponents they faced in these 2 years in the playoffs, less than stellar. And then when they did make it to the conference finals, just embarrassed by the Mavericks, embarrassed by the Thunder. And it is what it is. They're just a clear tier below, or were a tier below the Mavericks, and then still a clear tier below the Thunder in this regard. All right, where are we going for number 8? Because this is where it starts to get really, this is where we're getting into the nitty gritty of the teams that are like on the border of like, we're in the play-in tournament territory. I guess 7 is still technically play-in tournament territory, but where are you going with number 8?
That's really tough. I mean, certainly there's a few teams there. I think you could make a case for maybe about 3-4 teams that I think have a legitimate chance. Having said that, I kind of just wound up settling, and I'm not, again, you can convince me of otherwise, but I think from my point of view, I think the San Antonio Spurs will be the 8th best team in the Western Conference. I think they make that leap. I think getting everything in order now, kind of leaning into this next phase of their future, drafting well, and luckily over the last couple seasons to bolster a good solid core there, making some sharp trades too. Like maybe the acquisition of a guy like Kelly Olynyk doesn't seem like much of a needle mover, but to shore up depth for a young team like that, to be able to continue to find that next level, you've already got, look, all of this, I can build up this team as much as I might want to, and all of it is built on whether or not Victor Wembanyama continues to stay healthy and if he can play for a full season and be out there for a majority of regular season games, because we saw what happened last season when they were a fringe playoff contender, and then his injury just torpedoed the whole season. So I think they're still in the same boat. They're relying more on depth than just on being top heavy. And while you still have Wembanyama, a top 10, top 15 player in the league, depending on where you view him, and De'Aaron Fox is a great potential fringe all-star player every season, you're going to rely on a lot of players stepping up and having consistent good games and good season and high levels of production for them to be able to crack this top 5 to 8 range. But I think they're capable of it. I really do. And I think the coaching is going to be a question as well. I'm curious to see now that they're going to be moving on from this first season without Greg Popovich even being more of a presence around the team. Like, is that going to be a distraction? Is it going to be a question? Is it going to be something that everybody's moved on from? It's just one of those things, without Pop, who feels like he's been such a long time standard around the league. How is that even going to be something hovering over this team or not? I'm just curious to see what this Spurs team, how they respond, how they move forward, and how they approach this season, because I think they're right on the cusp of being a really, really good team.
Yeah, they've got now that they've got the future contract situation settled with De'Aaron Fox, right? They're locked into him long term with his 4-year extension. Adding names like Luke Cornett, Kelly Olynyk, and Lindy Waters this past offseason, so some significant front court depth to maybe ease the burden on Victor Wembanyama. I could definitely see them. They're going to play him a lot at the 4, I would imagine, next season, using those guys to kind of buoy that 5 spot, so that there's, I guess, less wear and tear on Wemby throughout the grueling 82 game regular season. I don't hate the Spurs at 8. I don't know if I can. I don't think I can get there. I'm not ready to put them ahead of the Grizzlies. And, that's, I guess, just going kind of par for the course with where things, were this past season. I still like the Grizzlies, and people forget the Grizzlies are a really young team still. Like, they started 2 rookies for a majority of the season last year in Jalen Wells and Zach Edey, and they still found a way to get all the way up to 48 wins. They lost Ja Morant for 30 games last year. That was the stretch where Desmond Bane really had to step up and deliver, and I think that was probably the stretch that, they were able to identify, that is the Orlando Magic were able to identify and be like, yeah, we want to go after Desmond Bane. That's our guy. To kind of put us over the top. I still like the Grizzlies, and I think that, the duo of Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant is still a really, really talented duo. They work really well together, health permitting for Ja, assuming he's able to play all the games or a majority of the games this upcoming season. But they're a really young roster. They've got a really high ceiling. I'm a big fan of Cedric Coward when he came out of the draft. I loved what the Grizzlies did on draft night, getting him as kind of their de facto future kind of Desmond Bane replacement. But it kind of feels like the Grizzlies have almost taken a little bit of a step backwards in the sense that they're not really under any kind of pressure. It's not like their window is opening or closing anytime soon. They're a very young roster. They're still really competitive, and they've got question marks, right? With the firing of Taylor Jenkins right before the end of last season, how their coaching situation looks moving forward. A lot of the same things that you could say, or that you did say about the Spurs, could also be applied to the Grizzlies, who are also still one of those younger teams in the Western Conference. So we'll see ultimately what happens there. I've got them at 8. You've got the Spurs at 8. We've got 2 spots left to get through our power rankings here. Who rises into the 9th and 10th spots? Who falls out of the mix in the Western Conference? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, if you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family, maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come out with you. Game Time makes it all possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and so simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. They've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying your tickets. Look, whether you're trying to go to a ball game or maybe you're trying to scope out some tickets for the games next season in the NBA, or it could be maybe you're trying to hit a concert or like a comedy or theater event happening near you. My favorite part about Game Time is they're fully transparent start to finish. They don't hit you with like the digital handling fees or the service charges at the end. It's awesome. The price you see from the start is the price you pay at the end. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And final segment here at Locked On NBA. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, go find the Locked On show for your favorite team. David, I'm sure we've already pissed off some fan bases with these power rankings. It always happens. There's no way. And we always leave here and somebody's going to be upset. We got 2 spots left, 9 and 10 in our Western Conference standings. Where are you going at 9?
At the risk of seeming a little boring here, I'm going to follow suit here and say that the Memphis Grizzlies are the 9th best team in the Western Conference. You can't undersell having 2 top-tier talents in Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and I think they've done a pretty solid job of shoring up the rest of the roster as well, even without the loss of Desmond Bane and into Orlando. I mean, I think getting KCP is going to help out, adding Ty Jerome to the mix if he can continue to perform at the level he did for Cleveland last year. I think that's such an important thing. I'm also curious to see how Zach Edey continues to develop. Is he going to be a consistent player? What's his role next year? How can he embrace it? How can he thrive in his second year? Is he strikes me, and I don't know why necessarily, but he strikes me as the kind of second year player that might take a step back or have a little bit of a sophomore slump, because I just don't know how he's going to continue to develop his game to that point. I'm happy to be wrong if I am. That's just my feeling right now, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit lower on the Grizz than you are, than some other people are. But there are questions about this team, coaching wise, whether or not the roster continues to develop at the same level. And I think also you have to wonder about Morant. Like, what kind of version of Ja Morant are we going to have this year? Is he going to be able to stay healthy? I think those, as far as, and maybe this seems a little simplistic to say, but as far as Morant goes, so will the Grizzlies. And so he has to be able to be the kind of great all NBA player that he can be.
I think that makes perfect sense. And I think you go back and look at the years where the Grizzlies truly were, near the top of the Western Conference, right? They were kind of running not running the show in the West, but they were legitimate, like, Western Conference and juggernauts-ish. Like, they were right at the top, right? They were a strong team in the West for back-to-back seasons. And unfortunately, right, that identity, that version of the Grizzlies kind of derailed, and they've had to rebuild and retool. They've gotten a lot younger. So I agree with the question marks, and similar to what we said about the Wolves earlier, right? This is a league that is made by and driven by your star players. And if Ja Morant can't deliver at the highest level, if he can't be superstar Ja Morant, which I thought it was kind of weird that, like, when Ja had that whole bit where he talked about, like, Jaren Jackson Jr. is our best player and he's our guy and all that. Like, I understand wanting to gas up your teammate and, like, build him up and all that, but, like, Ja is the Grizzlies' best player when he's playing like superstar Ja Morant. There's no contest, right? Triple J is so important to what they do. Absolutely, he's the anchor of their defense, all that. But when Ja is playing at a superstar level, Triple J doesn't come close to him. So at least that's my perspective on it. So Ja has to be that guy for the Grizzlies to be able to make some noise in the Western Conference for sure. So I agree on that front. I'm going with the Mavericks at 9, though.
Okay.
And part of it is maybe I'm drinking too much of the Nico Kool-Aid here. But I do think that they're even with the absence of Kyrie Irving, even with the uncertainty regarding Anthony Davis, at least for the start of the season, health-wise, the Mavericks are going to be a really good defense. They have a chance to maybe finish somewhere in the top 5 defensively. And if they're top 5 in defense and even, like, remotely close to middle of the pack on offense, that'll be good enough. The defense will be able to carry them through a lot of regular season games and will be able to net them a certain amount of wins. And I think when you look at kind of these remaining teams here in the West, I think that Dallas has a lot less question marks around, I guess, youth than other teams do, right? Obviously, there's the question mark about Cooper Flag. Like, what does he look like? Does he I don't think there's really any questions about will Cooper Flag translate to the NBA. It's just, how well will he translate in year 1, right? There's going to be a lot of offensive responsibility on his shoulders with the absence of Kyrie Irving. There's a reason that the Mavericks ran Cooper Flag with the ball in his hands during Summer League. They wanted to get a glimpse at point Flag, basically running the show. They'll have D'Angelo Russell to be able to run the offense while Kyrie's gone. And then assuming they're able to get Kyrie back with at least, like, a month or 2 left in the regular season, that'll be a nice transition for them, for D'Lo to be able to go to the bench. And they've got that spark off the bench, the offensive plug and play there, have Kyrie back in the mix. I like the Mavericks. There's still some question marks there, but I do think that they are more of a certainty in that 9th spot than I think the Spurs at this point, for me personally.
No, it's perfectly solid. I don't think there's a wrong choice here. And that's why I've got the Mavs at my 10th spot. So I totally see the vision there. And I agree with you. I think they've got enough depth there. They've got enough on this roster. And again, depending on the health of Anthony Davis, if he can continue to be out there and be the kind of impact player that he has been throughout his career, sure, this is an easy conversation to have. But I am concerned about that health issue. I am concerned about Kyrie taking off. And what version of D'Angelo Russell are we going to see? Like, it's just every year you're convinced that maybe he can be an impact player, and then every year you're reminded, oh yeah, that's why it's never worked out anywhere. And I can't accept that he's going to be that kind of player. Like, whether it's in Golden State or anywhere else, like, I'm kind of tired of the D'Angelo Russell experiment, the experience, I guess. It's just every year you kind of buy into it, and maybe he'll have a good game, and you see those flashes, and it's like, oh, well, maybe he's just not going to be that kind of guy anymore. And that being the case, you wonder whether or not they are going to be as good, whether or not Jason Kidd can get the most out of this group. And look, you've got Clay on that team still. He's going to play. Um, to what degree are we going to see the version of Klay Thompson that we expect to? Like, aging players typically cannot continue to produce at the level that they're accustomed to. And how does his game age without a guy like Kyrie taking some of the heat off defensively, et cetera? So, like, are they going to be able to limit what Klay can do? Is he going to be effective in stretches here? There are, to me, some questions about this group, and which is why I have them at number 10. But if it all works out, maybe this is, again, something you could say about every team, but I like their ceiling higher than most of these groups, because we're talking about a team that was just in the finals a couple seasons ago, and they're not much more different than that team was. And so I think there's a lot of good things to like about this group, but there's some questions there that to me have yet to have a clear and definitive answer, and that's why I might be just a smidge lower there and have them 10th on my list.
I think there's one pretty drastically big difference about this Mavericks team from the team that made it to the finals. One very big beer drinking difference from this Mavericks team, but I digress. It's funny because then we got to flip it back, because then I go, I'm going with the other Texas team to round out the top 10. I think the Spurs are close. Right. I just don't know that they're going to have, I guess, the leap that maybe you foresee them having, or that, other pundits have kind of pegged them to take this significant jump this upcoming season. I do think there are still question marks about the coaching, as well as, for me, you can hang it up on the health of Victor Wembanyama for sure. But even Wemby, fully healthy for, we'll say 70 games, right? Like, I still just don't know if the Spurs are truly ready to take that next step, simply because they've still got so much young talent on their roster, right? Like, yes, they've got Wemby. Yes, they've got De'Aaron Fox now to kind of, steer the ship. But, and Steph Castle, fresh off Rookie of the Year, like he's phenomenal. But where they, they've still got to prioritize development is the thing. And I think that's going to be the issue, is when you start butting up against wanting to compete at a higher level versus sacrificing those developmental reps, are the Spurs going to be willing to live with mistakes and issues from Dylan Harper as he's growing into his role with that team as a rookie? Or are they going to sacrifice some of those mistakes in that developmental runway in order to compete at a higher level? And that's where there's a bit of a trade-off, where I think I think the Spurs are going to be like 1 year away from being like legitimate players in the Western Conference. That's not to say that they can't maybe finish a little bit higher than I have them. I've got them at 10. I think they'll be like right on the precipice of the play-in tournament. But maybe they surprise me, right? Maybe they take that leap. Maybe Wemby's just such a dominant force on both ends of the court that, he studied with the Shaolin monks, and he comes in and he's just unlocked his inner eye, all that stuff. I don't know. God, the Shaolin monk stuff is like the most Spurs thing that I've ever seen happen ever. David, is ridiculous.
There's a long list there. I mean, there's a lot of Spursy type things. Listen, I can't fault that either. I understand why might be a little bit lower on them. I just think that this team seems like they're young enough where some people are going to discredit them, and to a certain degree. And I think for a star level player like Wembanyama and a fringe star level player like Fox, for them to prove themselves at this stage of their respective careers. Like Fox, I see him, and I see a very, very good player in the NBA, but I don't know that I necessarily see him as the kind of 1A type player on your group. And I don't think he's capable of that. And I think we need to see him be that kind of player, or pretty close to that kind of player for the Spurs. And so that's why I'm a little more bullish on them, and just because I think they will respond to them. I think the questions are what's going to drive this group, because they're young, because they can have a who cares attitude and just go out there. And I think their priority, honestly, like, you question whether or not they're going to lean into trying to win games or whether or not they should be focused more on development. I think you can do both. I don't think you have to lean so completely into development that you wind up sacrificing game to game improvement and wanting to be a better team and focused on achieving wins. That might cost some individual players a chance to get those extended minutes, but I trust an organization like the Spurs to get it right because they've just always been able to incorporate young players. And maybe it's a different coaching staff, maybe it's a different vibe around the group. But I just, again, you can't discount a team like the Spurs because they just have such a proven track record of being able to blend in talented youth players with the pursuit of many wins and championship success, playoff success in this case. Because I don't think they're a contending team. I think that would be really overstating things to a huge degree. But I do trust what this group is capable of, and I think what their focus will be is to win a lot of games. So that's why I have them a little bit higher. But you know what? We'll see. It's the West is so interesting, and I was looking ahead already to the Eastern Conference, a good group there as well. Although you don't really see them achieving the same kind of win totals as you do out West, but the West is going to be yet again another bloodbath next season.
We'll definitely be breaking down spots 6 through 10 in the Eastern Conference next week on our weekly episode here at Locked On NBA. But we want your thoughts on the power rankings 6 through 10. What did you think of our rankings? What are your do we want your no? We do want your thoughts. We love hearing from you guys, listeners, dear viewers. Let us know in the YouTube comments how you're feeling about these rankings. Give us your own 6 through 10 rankings in the comments. But until next time, thanks so much for hanging out with us here at Locked On NBA. Be on the lookout for our sister show on this very same feed. And we'll catch you guys on our very next Locked On NBA.